Those are the kinds of things that I've been hearing. They also said, out of government, what do we want out of you back in Washington, D.C.? We want a reasonable fiscal policy. You've got to begin to run the government the way we run our families, the way we run our family budgets, the way we run our businesses. That is, you can't keep spending more than you take in year after year after year. Now that's what I've heard other opinions, but I would say that's the dominant message that I've been receiving around the district. To me, the most important issue is where are the jobs? Where are the jobs? The fact of the matter is, this is the longest sustained period of high unemployment, I think basically since the Great Depression. Levels this high. No one who supported the programs that were put into place over the last 2.5 years suggested we were going to have unemployment at this level. We appear to be mirroring those kinds of jobless recoveries or jobless economies that we've seen in Europe over the last 30 years, as opposed to the dynamic economic improvement that we've seen in the United States by and large over the last 20 to 30 years with us. That is, our country, through our job creators creating jobs, enough to maintain enough room for those people who are continuing to work past what used to be the traditional retirement age, plus creating enough jobs for those who are entering the job market, that is the young people coming on. One of the tragic circumstances that we see right now is that we're not creating those jobs, so you don't see the opportunities for the young people coming into the field. You also see tremendously high levels of unemployment in areas of the most difficulty in creating jobs, inner city, minority youth, etc. And so I think that's what we ought to be focusing on. And some of us have been suggesting that that ought to be the focus that we, that is in Congress and the President of the United States, has. There's been a lot of talk about that. I believe there has been action, or it's been action in the wrong direction. We've had some controversial issues, to say the least, over the last several months. We were sworn in for this particular Congress in January of this year, so we're in the 8th month of this particular Congress. We have gone through CRs, which are continuing resolutions. Those are spending resolutions that were left over from inaction last year, meaning that instead of, during this current fiscal year, which will end at the end of September, instead of this fiscal year having had completed appropriation bills for the area, for the total government, that is, used to be 13, I believe it's 11 now, specific individual spending bills. We never completed action. The Congress didn't complete action on them last year, so for this current fiscal year. So as a result, we have to do what's known as continuing resolutions, continue the resolution for funding for the programs. And we had a big fight about that earlier in the year, as many of you may recall. The question was exactly what did we end up doing there. There were those who were disappointed, saying, well, you promised that you were going to cut $100 billion in the first fiscal year. By the time we were elected and began the fiscal year, it was already about 4 months into it. And so on that same scale, that is for the remaining months of the fiscal year, we did enact a continuing resolution that cut, I believe it was $77 billion, which would be akin to $100 billion for the full year. There was some criticism afterwards saying, well, what you voted on really didn't give us that. It was closer to $38 billion. Some of those are projections. I mean, those are projections, trying to figure out exactly how these things are going to come into play and what it actually is going to result in. If I could bring you from the continuing resolution, where some people were disappointed that it did not cut as much as we suggested it would, to just this last month, when we were dealing with the question of, do we raise the debt ceiling? And in the vote that we finally had for raising the debt ceiling, we required that we cut more than the debt ceiling was worth. And some people said, well, wait a second, the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, came up with a plan that he said was going to cut so much. They gave it to the Congressional Budget Office. The Congressional Budget Office threw it back and said, no, it doesn't cut as much as you said it would. But a lot of people don't understand why it didn't cut as much as the Speaker said it would and that we thought it would. It was because the impact of the continuing resolution we adopted at the beginning of the year was greater than they thought it was. And instead of cutting $38 billion, or instead of cutting $77 billion, it actually cut over $100 billion. So we were more successful in setting those spending restraints earlier in the year. The problem was we were still working on the old numbers because that's what we were given. When they readjusted, they said, wait a second, you're not cutting as much in the second round because we've already cut a certain amount. So we went back to the drawing boards and we added more cuts to it. So that in fact, we did end up with the vote that we made with cuts that will be reflected over the last 10 years of $917 billion. The debt ceiling increase approval was for $900 billion. So if you net it all out, we cut more than we approved for the debt ceiling. Now people say, well, why are you doing those two things? I mean, you know, you're going to cut, why increase the debt ceiling? It's like this, it's like a family. You got a credit card, and several members of your family have access to the credit card. And somebody in the family, unbeknownst to you, goes out on a spending spree. And at the end of the month, you get the bill from the credit card company. And you look at it and say, oh my God, we didn't plan on this. And what's the first thing you do?
Kill your
First thing you do is you take the credit card away, don't you? Or cut it out. So that's what we did in terms of the cut for spending. It starts now. It was cutting up the credit card. Then we look at the bills that already are coming due as a result of past actions. And the question is, can you say to your credit card company, not going to pay it? Well, we can't say that either. That's what well, if I would love to do it, if I could do it, but that's not the real world. So we then approved the raising of the debt ceiling to approve the appropriation of funds to take care of the debt that we've already incurred as a nation. So the fact of the matter is, we utilized the requirement of approval in the House of Representatives. First of all, Madam, this is a meeting where we are going to have an intelligent discussion.
Shut up! Shut up! Nation, we need productive, meaningful work.
Then shut up and let him talk.
We're not going to get it from budget. We've got to stop the $17 trillion.
Why are you bailing out Wall Street?
Wall Street and invest it in a productive recovery.
This is the
My generation is making
We're not interested. We're not interested. We're not interested. We're not interested. We're not interested in what you have to say. We're not interested in what you have to say.
You're more concerned with your pension and bowing down to Wall Street than the United States of
We're not
America.
interested in what you have to say.
United States of America. My generation has no future. No future.
What you're doing is wrong.
Degrees at Berkeley
Yes, you
and
are wrong.
at Starbucks.
Madam, I'm going to ask you politely to leave if you will not abide by the rules of the meeting.
Congress's power to Obama and his
Please.
12 people are now in the
You're
Congress
destroying
because
the
of your
Congress.
vote.
You deserve to go to jail. You should have you should go to
We
jail.
didn't come to hear you. Get out.
You're going to destroy the nation.
Right.
Why don't you resign? Mr. Rosalie. Thank you.
The future.
What you did 2 weeks ago is treason to the United States.
It's a fascist coup.
You've got constitutions out here. You've got constitutions.
All right. So now we will mention what we're doing. The President, under the Constitution, needs the approval of the Congress to spend money. It's called the power of the purse. I take that very, very seriously. I think oftentimes we have forgotten that. The President can't spend a single penny unless it's authorized by the Congress. Similarly, I believe a proper reading of the Constitution requires approval of the Congress to pay the debt, because that is in fact an expenditure of funds. That's why we have the vote on raising the debt ceiling. It is the approval for us to pay the debt we've already incurred or about to incur. Normally, it is a relatively non-controversial thing. And what I mean by that is normally the Congress goes along with it. In this period of divided government, that is, the Republicans control the House, the Democrats control the Senate, the President happens to be a member of the party that controls the Senate. We believed it was important for us to utilize this opportunity to force a debate on spending, because we happen to believe that we need to grow this economy to create jobs, and to the extent we continue to spend more than we have by huge amounts, we depress the ability of the private sector to create jobs. We call into question the long-term credibility, creditworthiness of the United States government. And in fact, we are mortgaging our children and our grandchildren's future. So because the President needed our votes in the House, we had some leverage. We had leverage like we normally don't have. And so what we did was, we basically said, Mr. President, we will not agree to give you the votes that increase the debt ceiling until we have serious steps put into law which will begin us on that road towards fiscal sanity. So that's what we've done. Now, is it the plan that I would have drafted? No. Is it the plan that virtually any member of Congress by himself or herself would have drafted? No. Is it the plan the President would have drafted? No. Is it the plan that 100 individual senators would have drafted? No. But our Constitution sets up a system that requires ultimately cooperation of the House, the Senate, and the President. And as a result, it sometimes looked very, very messy. I had the privilege several weeks ago of introducing a member of the United States Supreme Court to an audience about this size made up of young people, that is college students who are interning in Washington, D.C. It was Justice Scalia. He said to this group, he said, what do you think is the thing that protects your freedom and liberty more than anything else? He said, most people would say the Bill of Rights, or they would cite one of the amendments, the first 10 amendments, which make up the Bill of Rights. They would say the Second Amendment, or the First Amendment, or the Fifth Amendment. And he said, but I will tell you, having studied other constitutions, there are other constitutions that read better than ours. And he said, if you look at the old Soviet Union, it has greater protections of your freedoms than it sounds like we do. But we know they didn't. He said the genius of our founding fathers was the structure of government created in the Constitution. And he said, when I try to explain that to people from Europe, they have a great difficulty understanding it. They say to me, this is Scalia talking, they say to me, oh, wait a minute, you mean if the House passes a bill, it doesn't become a law? If the Senate passes a bill, it doesn't become a law? Both of them have to pass it and still not a law, then it has to go to the President, he has to sign it. And if the President doesn't sign it, it goes back to the House and the Senate, and both of them have to pass it by a 2/3 vote? I mean, they think that's crazy. And then he said, think about this. In order to be Prime Minister of England, which is in rough analogy to our President, except he is a Chief of State, but in terms of his power, the Prime Minister is similar in England. You can't be Prime Minister in England unless you're a member of the legislative branch. You have to be a member of Parliament, be a member to head up the executive branch. That'd be like saying a President of the United States can't be President unless he was also in the House of Representatives or the Senate. To us, that sounds strange. And he said, what they did was, in setting up the Constitution, they wanted to make sure that no one person, no one party, no one faction, no one part of the government was so powerful that they could take your freedom away. And I think that was an amazing analysis. So as a result, it doesn't look pretty. It looks kind of ugly at times, but our system, our Constitution set up an inefficient system on purpose so that our freedoms would be protected. Now, I've got to tell you, when you're in there, it is frustrating. You think it looks frustrating from the outside, I can guarantee you it's frustrating from the inside. Because I say, what we voted on wasn't what I would have come up with. But it was, in my judgment, the best we could do to get a majority in the House, a majority in the Senate, and finally the President to sign it. And I would just end by this.